The following is a presentation from Creation Today Ministries and is made possible by the faithful support from our Creation members. To them, we say thank you. To learn how you can become a Creation Today member, visit us at creationtoday.org.
Let me back up. James is replying in the Q&A, and he says, hey, listen, I don't think you and Pastor Josh are being honest. He says, you're talking about context, and you've ignored Exodus 21, 8 through 11. The woman who's been adopted and can be given to his son as a wife, with the woman not having the same manner. I just want to read these three verses and just go, James, you're going to have to do some more explaining on how you think this is a bad thing. Here's Exodus 21, verses 8 through 11. If she does not please her master who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. That's actually a good thing, James. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. That's protecting her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. Going to treat her just like his own daughter. That's a good thing, James. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out free without paying any money. James, this is actually you got to think again about where they were at, the culture they were in, and read it through that lens and go, you got to realize this was really good, because otherwise he could just say, forget it, get out of here. And now she is supposed to be a slave or betrothed to somebody, and she's got no way out, no way to go make a living, no way to go anywhere else. Her legal hands are tied, and she can do nothing if this doesn't happen. So this is actually a really good blessing to her. It's treating her fairly. Josh, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, and just remember, in that era, there was no eharmony.com. And so everyone was engaged, betrothed, and married in this very practice. I mean, think about the story in the New Testament of Mary and Joseph. They're betrothed in the very same way. So the distinction here, I think, is the idea of slavery is so repugnant, because, again, we're thinking of it in 21st century terms. But everyone was married in contractual, financial ways, familial ways. And this would not be foreign at all. In fact, this would be the cultural norm all around the world at that time. And this woman that we're reading about here is given a Bill of Rights in this passage. She's not treated as livestock. And in fact, she has a say in this thing. And if it doesn't work out, and in the betrothal period, which, by the way, remember in the biblical era, including the time of Jesus, the betrothal period, there was no sexual intercourse. And so usually the betrothal in ancient Israel was a year-long period. And it would be similar to our modern engagement period, maybe in a Christian ethic and worldview. And so we should not, again, read the betrothal period as to be some sort of eHarmony or spouse swap type culture that we have today. This was a very common and a very moral and a blessing to a woman who found herself in this situation.
Cool. All right, if you're taking notes, this is good stuff. We got voluntary slavery going, I want to serve, man. We're doing a good thing. I mean, it's almost like building a company today, man. I just want to keep working for your company. You keep paying me money to support my family. I want to keep building this company. I want to keep doing this. Let's keep this together. Then you got criminal, which makes a whole lot more sense. If you steal something, work to repay it instead of going to a prison where you cannot repay it. Now you're even more of a burden on your family, who in prison times, for the most part, you had to go bring food and everything to them while they're not able to work and help. So interesting. I remember my dad saying he can see why the Bible only institutes punishments of repaying threefold or sevenfold, or beating. Look, you're going to get beat for that, or death. That actually logically makes more sense to have a system like that than the modern system that we have today. Anyway, that's here in America. Those of you around the world, it may be a little bit different where you're at. I've seen some places I would definitely not want to go to prison where you're at. All right. You got a third one.
Yes, I do. So we're going to continue on here to number 3, which is maybe a little harder, and the issue of conquest or war, slavery, which, by the way, again, not a foreign concept when you think about the modern era, World War I, World War II, the treaties that followed, the way people were treated post those wars. It's not a totally foreign concept. And I want to say this one idea. When we read the Bible, it is not all right to judge the moral rightness of these laws. God, who is the perfectly moral being, gave us these laws. And so instead, we need to read them humbly, seeking to how they apply to our lives. And one good way to think about the law of the Old Testament is the general equity of the law. How does this generally apply to our lives today? We're in a different context, culture. Definitely the United States of America is not a theocracy. We're not a covenantal nation. Very sadly, we've rejected God's law. But how would these laws best be applied in our concept today? And we also need to remember that Jesus Christ is King. And Christ as King fulfills these laws. He is the lawgiver. And so let's not just try to take these laws lightly, but let's also see how Jesus Christ might fulfill them. And that, again, we'll end on that point for sure tonight. So number 3, conquest laws. So Israel is entering the promised land. They're entering these Canaanite territories where the people are committing terrible acts, abominable acts. You see infanticide as the normal means of worship in the Canaanite culture. They're taking babies and they're placing these newborn children into altars on fire and burning them alive. They are taking them, the Old Testament says, and these Canaanite tribes are dashing their heads, crushing their skulls as an act of worship to their local deities. And so Israel's coming into a very perverse culture, and it's Israel's land. It was Abraham's land. It's been taken over. And God is now giving these laws concerning just war and what might happen. So here's an example of this, Deuteronomy 20. If an enemy city makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, you should besiege it. It's very important. If they won't make peace, besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword. But the women and the little ones, the livestock, and everything else in the city, all its spoil, you will take for plunder for yourselves. You shall enjoy the spoils of your enemies, which be the Lord your God has given you. We see a lot of illustrations of this in these battles with Israel and the tribes of the Canaanites. For instance, in Numbers 31, you see the war against Midian, and it says in verse 9 that the people of Israel took captive the women of Midian and their little ones, and they took plunder. Now, again, we can get really worked up when we start to read this, but don't forget, Israel's been slaves for 400 years, and God is establishing a merciful system compared to what was going on in Egypt and other places in the world. And Israel themselves would have to face this kind of law. In the year 722, the nation of Assyria marches in and enslaves these very people. In the year 586, the nation of Babylon marches into Jerusalem and enslaves the people of Judah and takes them away captive. And so these are conquest laws given for a particular time. These are very important laws because these laws speak to Israel coming into the land, and they, in particular, they're speaking to Israel and how they're going to deal with enemies who may try to undermine them or kill them in the future. So this is really important stuff, and I think it leads to the fourth point of slavery, the fourth type, if you will, and that is slaves that are purchased, which this text here is often called the chattel slavery text, because many of our critical friends of the scriptures read this text and they see this as a form of livestock slavery, which I think is very dangerous, and I'll show you why in a moment. So let's first read the controversial text. Leviticus 25:44-46. As for your male and female slaves whom you have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. So again, this is a purchasing of slaves. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you, and their clans that are also with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession. Notice, you may do this. You may make slaves of them. But over your brothers, the people of Israel, you should not rule one over another ruthlessly. So again, it's really easy today to read that and say, we are done for as Christians, because we're looking at it with 3,400-year-old eyes later in the future without the context. So what do we do with this? Well, Israel has just been freed from slavery in Egypt. And God, in what is called the Holiness Code of Leviticus, is giving laws about the people that are going to also come into the land of Israel, because Israel's going to be a blessed land, a prosperous land as the people of God. And he's giving laws about these individuals. And again, remember the buying and selling. LeBron James has been bought and sold, and so has many people in our modern context. It doesn't necessarily have to have the antebellum slavery connotation. So for instance, in Leviticus 19, a passage earlier in this section, it says there, when a stranger, that's a non-Jew, a non-Israelite, someone who's not a part of the covenant community of Israel, when they come within your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you. You shall love him as yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord, your God. And then how about a few verses earlier in this particular chapter, verse 35? If your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and a sojourner, and he shall live with you. Wow. Now, all of these ideas here are saying, don't be like Pharaoh in Egypt. Pharaoh in Egypt was ruthless. He was cruel. He didn't let you have a day of Sabbath rest. He made you work incessantly. In fact, I think these kind of texts are allusions back to Exodus chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, where we read that Pharaoh ruled with severity, with cruelty over Israel. So again, here we go. This is a really tough text about buying male and female slaves. And this is the ultimate text that critics of the Bible will utilize. So we've got to stop now and really think deeply about what's going on here. Slavery, commonplace in the ancient world. God is permitting something here. And again, just like God permitted divorce in the Old Testament, God is permitting an act of slavery in a world where there's criminal acts, where there's wars, where there is no government programs. He's permitting this act. So the big issue in this text is the statement, they may be your property to be inherited as a possession forever. And again, we have to ask, why aren't they released like the Israelites? What is the distinction here that gets everyone so upset? Well, what is the context? The context is you have to sell off your land due to famine. This is not forced on you by someone from the outside. This is something you are volunteering for out of desperation. And we are told here, the people over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly. And some of our critics of the Bible, our friends who are critics, say, see, you can be ruthless with these slaves. You just can't be ruthless with Israelite slaves. And I want to say, hold on a minute. That's an argument from silence. It doesn't say you can be ruthless to these people. You have to read the whole Leviticus code to see how God says to treat sojourners and foreigners who are in your land or are enslaved among you. So I want to start with a quote from the great New Testament scholar N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright has said that slavery in the ancient world did more or less everything that is done in our world by oil, gas, or electricity. Everything that we accomplish through our technology. Denouncing slavery would have been like denouncing electricity and the internal combustion engine. Slaves were, of course, often exploited, abused, and treated like trash, but they could become respected, cherished, and valued members of a family. And I think that that idea is very important, that the whole ancient world was run by indentured servants and slaves. It was a very different culture to our day. So don't read American, Southern, antebellum slavery into that text at all. In fact, the authoritative Anchor Bible Dictionary says we have in the Bible the first appeals in world literature to treat slaves as human beings for their own sake and not just in the interest of their masters. So, Eric, what we want to say here is that there is opportunity for these people who we just read about in this very hard passage to not be slaves long term. They could be perpetual slaves, but they don't have to be. And that's the key. If you read the whole context, you're going to see that. So let me make one more point, and then I think you might have something to speak on this. But in Leviticus 25, 47 to 51, hear this text, so important. If a stranger or sojourner with you, so this is a foreigner who's come into your land, they could be your slave. If they become rich and your brothers beside them become poor, and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you, or to a member of the stranger's clan. So what's the context here? You have a slave that's been purchased who lives with you. One of their family members comes into the land of Israel. They're not enslaved, and they become wealthy. They get money. Notice what it says here. Then, after he is sold, he may be redeemed. Very important. Couldn't do that in American slavery.
Right.
One of his brothers may redeem him. His uncle or his cousin may redeem him. A close relative from his clan may redeem him. Or, notice this is so important. If he grows rich, he may redeem himself. Wait a minute. You mean we're paying slaves money? Wait a minute. You mean they have rights? Yeah, actually, that is what the Bible teaches in the greater context. Notice in verse 50, he should calculate with his buyer from the year when he was sold, when he sold himself to him until the year of Jubilee, and the price of his sale shall vary with the number of years. The time he was with his owner shall be rated as the time of a hired worker. If there are still many years left, he shall pay proportionally for his redemption for his sale price. So this is amazing. Slaves earn money. They can purchase themselves out of slavery. So foreign to what we think of when we think of slavery. If it's all right, Eric, I know we're running out of time. I want to run a marathon, and can I just go through the Bill of Rights of slavery in the Bible? Would that be okay?
Yes, let's do that. And then I still want to get to our conclusion. And then, so right after you do that, I want to make one point, and then we'll get to our conclusion here.
Sounds wonderful. So let me get our screen back up here. So I want to very quickly point out a few things that I would call a slavery Bill of Rights, totally foreign to the entire ancient world. First off, injured slaves are to be released. So Exodus 21 says, if a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and destroys it, he should let the slave go free because of the eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he should let the slave go free because of his tooth. That is unprecedented in the ancient world, that a master could usually treat their slave as they pleased. In the Bible, if you knock a tooth out, being physically assaultive to the slave, immediately the law of ancient Israel said that slave was granted manumission. That slave was granted freedom. And this would have stopped American slavery in its tracks if this one law had been followed. Secondly, if a master killed his servant, the master would get the death penalty in the Bible. Again, this would have ended much of the horrific acts of antebellum slavery. Exodus 21:20. If a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged, or he shall be punished. The Jewish tradition, the Jewish Targum says here that they'll be slain with the sword. The death penalty will be given. Remember, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The punishment equals the crime. How about this one? This is my favorite of all. Deuteronomy 23. Runaway slaves should not be returned to their master. You shall not give up to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He should dwell with you, in your midst, in the place that he shall choose within one of your towns, wherever it suits him. You shall not wrong him. In the ancient world, whether in Rome or in the era of Moses, runaways were killed. In the South, wrongfully, runaways did not have rights. The Bible says, no, if someone's running away from this, it's because they're being treated unjustly, and they should be protected. So no one was forced to stay as a slave if they were being ill-treated or mistreated in the Bible. Also, slaves were commanded to take part in Sabbath. They were granted a day of rest. Exodus 20 specifically mentions the male servants or the female servants as being those who labor 6 days, but they are granted a seventh day of rest in the land, unlike the barbaric practices of Egypt. So Sabbath was a type of resistance against overworking and against the slave master idea where a person is treated simply as livestock. Debt slaves were released every 7 years with blessing, okay? Deuteronomy 15. We see this very clearly here where it says in the 7th year, you should let the slave go free, but don't let him go empty-handed. You should give to him liberally. In other words, they were blessed. Just like Israel, when they left Egypt, they were blessed by force because of the judgment of God. So slaves, and by the way, this would have really solved the American racial problems if slaves who had been unjustly held all those years had been blessed instead of Jim Crow laws and Ku Klux Klan attacks and the kind of things that this country did, tinkering with people's rights as image bearers of God. I wanted to rush because I wanted to get to this one. Slavery through kidnapping was a capital offense. Very important. These laws alone would have totally stopped American slavery from ever happening and would have decimated the slave trade, which was an immoral practice in this country. Exodus 21, if you steal a man and sell him, if you're found in possession of him, you should be put to death. I love to see the critics of the Bible start spouting off that one. We don't even have that kind of justice in this country. We just put them in jail for a while. Yeah. No, if you steal an image bearer of God and sell them, or if you're found in possession, these human traffickers, death. I think that would cut down the 27 million in human trafficking considerably today. How about Deuteronomy 24:7? If a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel, if he treats him as a slave or sells him, then the thief should die, and you should purge the evil from your midst. So this idea of kidnapping is a property offense. It's not a property offense. This is offense that draws capital punishment because you have taken an image bearer of God and put them into slavery. So I could say a lot more about these things, but the point here is, again, slavery bill of rights. Slaves can be redeemed and earn money. Injured slaves are to be released. If a master kills his servant, he's to be executed. Runaway slaves should not be returned to their master. Slaves must practice Sabbath. Debt slaves were to be released every 7 years with restitution and blessing. Slavery through kidnapping is a capital offense. And by the way, the New Testament tells us slaves should try to gain their freedom in 1 Corinthians 7. So the God of the slave is a God who sees them as an image bearer, who gives them these laws to protect them. He's the God who cared about the slave Hagar and her son Ishmael and rescued them and made a great nation out of a slave. The God of Joseph, who was a slave, the God of the people of Israel who were slaves. And of course, we were slaves to sin, and he sets us free too. And maybe we'll end on that note in just a second.
Yeah, let me just say this. I to those that still want to say that the Bible is okay with slavery, I just want to ask you, what is it that was used to end slavery? What did William Wilberforce use as his justification to say that's wrong? We have to stop this. We got to quit this, and worked tirelessly trying to make. He used the Bible to end the slavery. This was the standard that held the bar higher than people were living and said, guys, we're not measuring up. We got to go higher. We got to do this. We got to get rid of slavery. It's not the right thing to do. We're not treating people correctly. Diana brings up a good point. She says Brady and LeBron are under contract that they knowingly agreed upon in exchange for money. Diane, you're exactly right. Very similar to what many slaves did back in the day before, our modern times here. Very, very similar to voluntary slavery that Josh was talking about. Very similar. Wrap this up because I, as a believer, Josh, I've been bought with a price. I am no longer my own. Is that an indentured servant? Is that somebody who just gets to earn his freedom and pretty soon I can go do whatever I want? Or is that an actual bought with a price? I'm not my own slave. Can you hit that?
Yeah, how important this is that when you read the Bible, we see that our Lord Jesus, who is King of Kings, chose to humble himself. He added flesh and he became the slave of Yahweh, the slave of the Lord in the Bible. And so think, slaves could be redeemed with money. Jesus gives his life to redeem us. Injured slaves were to be released. Jesus died on the cross as the slave of the Lord. When you read, slaves are told to gain their freedom if possible. Well, what does the Bible say? If the Son would make you free, you would be free indeed. And so the gospel is so powerful that Jesus says no one can serve two masters. Now, the word serve there is a verb form of the Greek word slave, the word doulos. The word here in Matthew is doulion. No man can serve two masters. Now, look, you can have two jobs and work with two bosses, but Jesus particularly uses the term slave. You cannot be a slave to two masters because you're going to hate the one and love the other. You cannot serve God and money and the things of this world. Jesus Christ lived the perfect life for you and for me as the slave of the Lord. And if we turn to him, if we bow before him as king, he's going to give us a new law in our hearts. He's going to change our lives forever, give us everlasting life, freedom above all freedom, life everlasting. He will set us free. And now his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Come serve him, follow him. He will set you free from Pharaoh and from unjust slavery. That was the hope of the slaves in America, was the gospel. And I'm so thankful that it was many Christians, whether it was in the slave trade in Britain or here in this country, who stood up for the freedom.
If you've ever wanted to have consistent growth into interesting conversations that help you understand the foundation of the Word of God and share that foundation with a lost world that desperately needs it, let me invite you to become a Creation Today member. My name is Eric Hovind. I'm the president of Creation Today. We have conversations each week with special guests on a variety of topics that are both intriguing and help us to dig down deeper into God's Word. So if you've ever wanted to truly grow in your faith, let me encourage you to spend a year with me. We'll get 52 sessions together and you'll get to be a Creation Today member that gets access not only to every live event we do and have an opportunity to have discussions with the guests, but also everything we've done in the past. It's a great way for you and your family to grow your faith.